Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Dan Cordelicchio, and I want to welcome you to the Destination Health podcast. We've had some really phenomenal guests on in the past. However, this one, our guest today, truly inspirational. I think I'm going to call this From Tragedy to Triumph. I've listened to podcasts that she's been on, and Jamie and I were just talking, and I said that over the summer, I had the Atlantic Ocean to the left, the bay to the right, looking for a podcast to listen to. And I don't know, I just stumbled across a podcast Jamie was on. And so I listened to it and I listened to it again. And it was it was so moving. It was so motivational. So Jamie MoCrazy, thank you for contacting us and wanting to be on our podcast. I said I wanted you on my podcast, and here it is. So, it's truly an honor and a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be on the podcast. I love podcasts, so
Yeah,
I'm happy to be here.
yeah, they're what we say on our podcast. We like to motivate, educate, and inspire, and everybody's going to be motivated, educated, and inspired today because this is going to be so interesting. So for those of you who don't know who Jamie is, all right, Jamie Crane Mauzy, right? Is that the way you say your last name?
Mauzy.
Mauzy. Okay,
Yeah.
Jamie Crane Mauzy. Jamie grew up on the ski slopes. By the time she was 18 years old, she won the Junior World Championships, moved to Utah, continued to train as a professional slopestyle and halfpipe skier. In 2015, at the World Tour Finals, Jamie had an accident. She went into a coma, became paralyzed. In an instant, Jamie went from being one of the world's best slope style skiers to relearning gross motor skills such as walking, riding a bike. However, Jamie didn't let the results of this horrific accident keep her down. She worked hard to recover, leaning on family and friends for support, and charged forward in a life with optimism. 8 months after this accident, Jamie is skiing again. Shortly thereafter, she started college. After that, she began her motivational speaking journey. So this is truly tragedy to triumph. Right now, Jamie is studying neuroscience on Harvard and works as a celebrity ski guide and coach at Woodward Park City. Jamie, it is truly an honor and a pleasure to have you on. I have one question before we start.
Yeah.
How'd you become MoCrazy? What was that?
That's a good question. And it actually begins when I was a year old. When imagine this little girl, a year old, she looks up at the drapes in her living room. And what does she think to do? Climb to the top. She wants to get to the top. So she climbs up to the top of the drapes, and then she's like stuck. So I'm stuck up there. And I go, "Mommy, helping me. Mommy, helping me." And my mom comes running out of the kitchen and sees me at the top of the drapes and grabs me down. And so part of the brand MoCrazy started developing at that time. And then it kept growing throughout my whole life in my skiing and gymnastics. And then also Crane Mauzy is complicated. And it's really hard to pronounce the Mauzy because it's French. And so then my mom always named me MoCrazy. She's the one who actually came up with the nickname, my little MoCrazy, when I was a baby. And then when I started competing, professionally, the announcers would announce Jamie MoCrazy is now on course, because that name is much catchier and people will remember. Like even now, people who knew me back when I was competing like 10 years ago, or before I was a professional, so like 10 years ago, they're like, "Oh, Jamie MoCrazy." That's how they connect to me.
Right,
so
sure.
And then when I went into my accident, I recovered. And the brand MoCrazy, the idea it represents is thinking about things in a different way. So thinking about and trying things that people might say are crazy, but you have done research and you have figured out that they're what you should do, and you're trying new ventures that are crazy, MoCrazy ventures that will increase your opportunities and luck in the outcome after trauma.
I love that. I love that. So really the MoCrazy brand is you're this adventurer since you were 1 year old, right? You know, you were a little crazy, which is all good. And now MoCrazy is, you know, we're going to pivot and we're going to do something different, and we're going to inspire you to live a better life, right? Than what you're before. It says here, I mean, teaching others how to control their luck after trauma. I love that. So it sounds like you were very athletic all of your life. Is that true? You did some gymnastics and then you got interested in skiing. So tell us a little bit about your life before we get into the accident.
Of course. So actually, when I was 9 years old, we have this newspaper article, and I was actually just in Connecticut at my dad's house, and he has the article still, and we took pictures. But I'm 9 years old, and I had won the state championships in gymnastics. And my fantasy, I wrote down my sports fantasy, was to combine skiing and gymnastics. Because at that time, when I was 9 years old, I also won the state championships in skiing. I was skiing since I was a year old, so all my life. Yeah, all my life, because my grandmother actually is a World Cup downhill champion. Back in the days, like some of the old original ski movies she's in.
Right.
When the skis were straight all the way.
Right.
And so it's just passed down in my family. And so my dream was to combine skiing and gymnastics. And so finding slopestyle and halfpipe is that, because slopestyle is when you get judged on an overall impression of your whole run, and you hit multiple jumps, about 2 or 3, and then you have 2 or 3 rails, which you slide on. And so you're doing flips and spins, so gymnastics on snow. And halfpipe is flipping and spinning up each side of the pipe, so gymnastics on snow. Right.
So you've actually lived your dream. You were living your dream at that point. Wow. I mean, I skied when I was younger, but I mean, you know, come on now. I mean, I'm just going down the hill and I'm having a nice time. You know, I'm looking at the trees, I'm looking at the sky. You know, you're really taking it to another level. You know, my son was is a hockey player, and he was on the ice when he was 1 also, and he's developing. So it's interesting to see. Now, let's go to the day of the accident. Let's go right in, because I think that we're just, you know, there's so much to talk about. So, you know, take us back to that day.
All right. So you wake up and it's a beautiful sunny day. It's in April in Whistler. So you know, in the springtime when you can feel that warmth is coming, and it just is like radiating off the sun. So it's one of those days. And a beautiful blue sky, not a cloud in the sky. And so I was competing, and my first run, I ended up, so there's two competition runs in the finals. And so my first run, I ended up sitting in 4th place. And so in 4th place, that's not on the podium. And I'm pretty little and ambitious. I'm very ambitious. And you know that person who kind of always has to be the best. That's how I was. And I had been ranked 1st or 2nd overall in the world for the previous 3 years. So 4th place didn't cut it. So now imagine you're with my sister, because my little sister was there as well. She's going to compete in halfpipe the next day, but she's at the top of the course, and she knows that I'm going to upgrade and do a double flip. And she also knows that she thinks the coolest part of the 2013 X Games was meeting Shawn Johnson, the Olympic gymnast, and getting to hang out with her. That was her favorite part. But my favorite part was becoming the first woman in the world to land a double flip in a slopestyle run. So I knew, and she knew, I had a pretty good chance of getting on the podium. So she gives me a hug. I drop in for my run. She sees me take off the first jump, land perfectly, take off the second jump, then take off the third jump, which I'm doing the double flip, and she sees my takeoff, but she can't see my landing because of the mountain. But then she doesn't see me hit the next jump. and she still doesn't see me hit the next jump. And all of a sudden, the ski patrol radio crackles to life. We need all hands on deck and a helicopter on standby. She looks at the coach. Without a word, they put their skis on. As she's cresting the mountain, she sees me. I'm spewing blood, convulsing, and my eyes are rolled back in my head. And in a blink, our lives were changed.
Indeed. So tell us about your injuries. What happened with your injuries?
So what happened, I actually don't remember the day at all. But what I've been told is I landed the trick on my feet, but I caught an edge and whiplashed my head onto the snow. In such a way, my brain started bleeding in 8 spots. Wow. And I hurt my right brain stem, which paralyzed my right side. So when I actually was airlifted to Vancouver General Hospital, my first responders wrote up my fatality report because they did not think I would live to the hospital. And then when I arrived at the hospital, Dr. Mapinder Sakhan, who a year previously had gone to Cambridge, England to learn a scientific medical advance, which has a fancy name, but we're going to call it the oxygen pressure analyzing brain bolt, because that's what it does. It analyzes your oxygen and pressure from a bolt that's drilled into your brain. And it had never been used in North America. And when I arrived, I was young, I was healthy, and I had a really bad accident that they did not think was going to have positive outcomes. So I was a perfect trial. So,
right.
My family signed off on the piece of paper and allowed me to become the first patient in North America to receive an oxygen pressure analyzing brain bolt. So that's when my medical advances support started happening, which is vital to be able to have doctors to think outside the box. Like I've stayed connected to Dr. Mapinder Sakhan, and now I call him Miracle Mip. And I'd like to think that it's really remarkable to have to be able to allow doctors to learn new procedures and try new things. That's how medicine advances. So that's really important to keep being able to make new advances. And
that's just an amazing story. And from there, that emotional roller coaster, which we'll get into in a few, must have been, all over the place. I know that you and I have spoken about your family and having your family involved in your treatment. So tell me more about that, because I find this fascinating.
Yeah, so I am really close to my family. And at the time of my accident, my family, especially my mom, did so much to create the outcomes that I received. And so what I mean by that is she has a master's in psychology, and she's a self-esteem coach and has had grants from the government to do that. And she had an idea that she had done some research into brain injuries before I actually had my brain injury. This is really fascinating. You know how Facebook pops up memories from the past?
Right.
Just about 2 weeks before my brain injury, that same year, a memory pops up, and she wrote this long article about neuroplasticity and the fact that every human can recreate synaptic connections by building habits, and that it's possible after any injury. So she had done some of this research into this, and so then when I crashed, the communication still sometimes, like there was still some doctors who said I was never going to recover. And she refused to let them say that. She said, you don't know. You know more about her brain than anyone else, but nobody knows who she's going to recover to. And I'm going to love whoever she becomes. Whatever stage she's at,
that's great.
I love her.
Yeah,
and
that's
so
great.
It was, I'm so lucky that I had that, because neuroplasticity is fairly recent, and even though what neuroplasticity is the that people can recreate synaptic connections in their brain at any time, and it shows that the damages are not permanent from a brain injury, the deficits. And so when your doctor was trained in medical school, if they were trained 30 years ago, they were probably trained that the deficits were permanent and you had to make whatever changes you could, but the problems were permanent. So if I couldn't move my right arm, I would never be able to move my right arm. And so neuroplasticity disagrees with that. And it's getting more and more common, but there's still people who believe that the deficits are permanent, and there's people who might believe you have a chance to change. But as Mitt pointed out, after he saw me again, actually really quick, for my 1 year anniversary, I went back to Whistler, and that's when I met Dr. Mipinder Sakon, Miracle Mip. And he was in a meeting, I was in the ICU, and he looked at my mom and sister, then he looked at me, and back at my mom and sister, and came out of his meeting and started to cry and said, before I saw you, I didn't know it was possible. And I've interviewed him on my talk show, Life Gets MoCrazy, and he's reiterated that as well, and also mentioned how they changed their protocol for family involvement and things like that. But the thing is a lot of doctors, when you're in school, you're either right or you're wrong when you're tested. It's all black and white. Yeah, when you're practicing, there's very little black and white, especially regarding the brain. Because if you break a bone, it's more concrete how you fix it. But with the brain, each brain is diverse, and every single person will have a different outcome if they do the exact same protocol. And so it's really hard to be a doctor and say, I don't know, because you're a leader. The family's looking up to you. So you need to say, these are what your outcomes could be, or these are what your outcomes, and show them a few variables. But it's challenging to have to admit that there's variables. Doctors like to always know the answer.
Oh, I understand. And I 20 years ago, you want to have the answer. I've been practicing for over 30 years, and I understand neuroplasticity, where neurons can grow and make these new synaptic connections. I deal in the world of functional neurology, and we do this all day long. Now, we're going to get back into neuroplasticity. I mean, one of the words that came up when you were talking, and I wrote it down and I circled it, is it's like you've been a pioneer all of your life, right? You've been a pioneer all of your life. I mean, you're climbing up at the age of 1, and now it's like you're 9 years old, and you're going to start skiing. You're skiing at 1, and you know what? Always the best. Always the best. That's what I have circled here, is always the best. At what point in time did you sit there and say, you had this treatment? It's a pioneering move in medicine. At what point in time did you sit there and say, you know what? This is not going to beat me, and it's not going to define me?
Well, I honestly don't really remember deciding, making that decision, but everything I remember, I never thought that my life was going to be worse. In fact, when I came back I was airlifted back to Murray in Salt Lake City, Intermountain Medical Center. And that's when I was doing my inpatient rehab. And when I was in inpatient rehab, the nurses, my mind started to come back. I had serious amnesia for 6 weeks. So no memory at all of day-to-day short-term memory retention. But as my memory came back, the nurses would ask me where I was, because that was one of the tests that they did to see if you were ready to leave the hospital.
Right.
And so they would ask me where I was, and with a straight face, I would tell them, I'm in a movie about a hospital. And they'd say, well, why do you think that? And I'd say, well, old people and sick people go to a hospital. I'm not old. I'm not sick. I have a hammock in my room, pictures all over the wall. Right. And when you poke me with the needles, it doesn't hurt. So obviously it's a movie. And then they had a hard time trying to, like, they're like, how do we tell our patient the reason it doesn't hurt when we poke her with the needles on the right side is because she's paralyzed.
She's paralyzed and she can't feel, correct.
She can't feel it. But that idea, when I left the hospital, I began to realize I had the accident. I did not realize how serious it was until a year out. But part of that denial about thinking I was in the hospital, denial about how serious it was, coincided with the belief system that I was going to be okay. So even when I had obvious deficits, I believed that I could overcome them. And I did not think that I shouldn't work at it. So one of the big things I did was I set attainable goals. And I had incredible help with my family. So they started by when my mind was coming back in the hospital. That's when I remember setting attainable goals.
Right.
Like walking up the stairs, go faster, go farther each day.
Right.
And then when I got home, I would do outpatient therapy. And then I also, with my mom, would relearn how to write, starting at a kindergarten level, back to writing book reports. And then I had to do Algebra 1 again. And I would do things for my right side of my body because of the paralysis from brainstem damage. It started in the hospital. My mom would tape down my strong hand and make me utilize my weak hand, which cleared those nerve pathways. I like to give the analogy of, in life, you're all climbing the mountain of life, and sometimes you get caught in a metaphorical avalanche. And when that avalanche, and it brings you to the bottom, is a brain injury, it covers all your nerve pathways. Like on a snow day, you know? On a snow day, kids are excited because snow, and quite often they're excited because they don't have to go to school.
That's right.
Why don't they have to go to school? Because people can't get there. Why can't they get there? Because the roads aren't plowed. You know, you can't go on the roads if they're covered in snow. And so your brain pathways are covered in snow. Yet with neuroplasticity, understanding neuroplasticity, you know you can you can dig out the snow, but it's like walking through snow up to your neck. And the more times you walk that path and you create that habit, they'll open back up again. So by my mom forcing me to use my right side of my body was part of that. And then she had me do hand strengtheners, pick up sand, so work on my dexterity. And every day I was doing this work, especially on my right arm, to get my right arm to get back.
What other exercises did you do in rehab, in the hospital, or that your mom gave you to help out with the neuroplasticity?
Well, so at the very beginning in the hospital, we'll go a little bit in a train.
I love that, yes.
In the hospital, when I didn't have short-term memory, I could not talk. One of the things my mom had me do was Rosetta Stone, which is a language learning application in English, which is my native language, because I needed to relearn English. So that was a big thing, and that definitely helped me. At the very beginning, I failed the first lesson in Rosetta Stone English like 3 times, which is pretty darn basic. It's like, hello, goodbye. And I couldn't figure that out. But then by doing it, everything comes back much faster when recovering from a brain injury than the first time you learned it. So that's something. And like walking up the stairs. And so then when I started out doing that with my physical therapist, and then I would practice with my sister and my mom every day, because that was one of the goals that I set for myself, was to go farther and faster. And then when I was in inpatient rehab, two things that I'd like to mention about inpatient rehab was, at the very beginning, my occupational therapist asked me, Jamie, who does your hair? My response, well, my Jeannie does. Isn't that so cool? Like that Jeannie can do my hair. Isn't that just so cool? He didn't say anything. And then the next day, Jamie, who does your hair? Well, I told you. Jeannie does my hair, and it's so cool because she's my sister and she can do my hair. And he said nothing. And then the next day, same thing. And then he goes, well, don't you think that you should brush your own hair? And I said, Well, of course. I brush my hair every day. You ask me who does my hair, like who cuts it and who dyes it. Jamie does my hair, which is really cool because most of the time sisters can't do your hair, but she's so good at it. She does everyone in the family's hair. And he was like, oh. And so sometimes, and my point with that is that sometimes what you're conveying and trying to help people is not what they're understanding. So what he thought that he was explaining was who brushes your hair. What I thought as a 22-year-old young woman was who does your hair is like who fashion, like who does.
Right. Who's your fashion designer for your hair, right?
Exactly. And so sometimes what you're saying, people misconstrue what it is.
Right.
And then the next thing I was going to mention about outpatient therapy is in outpatient therapy, with my physical therapy, I got to the point of being physical pretty quickly because like you had mentioned, I had been a professional athlete. I'd been an athlete my entire life. I was used to pushing my body to do things it didn't want to do. And so I was comfortable. And so I got able to do most everything physically pretty fast. And also outside, I was also working with a physical trainer on my own 4 days a week, which my family got for me. But so physically, I surpassed it pretty quick. And so they're trying to come up with things for me to do in physical therapy. And so one of the things they realized was to deliver what I wanted while minimizing the risk. And so what I wanted was to be a little bit MoCrazy and have fun.
Right.
And that was my life, like an adventurous, thrill-seeking, MoCrazy lady. And of course, after a brain injury, you have to be very careful about those things. And I luckily was intelligent enough not to want to put my life at risk because I loved living and I knew I would destroy my family if something had happened to me because I was not paying attention. And I received so much support, I couldn't let that all go to waste. So I didn't do any daredevil things, but what we did, like unsafe things, but what we did was we got it so that I could start skateboarding on the apparatus that they usually use to teach people how to walk again. So I was in a harness and I was hooked up and then I could skateboard. And if I fell, I was in a harness so I would not hit the ground. I would just be floating. So they got it so that I could do a little bit of MoCrazy and deliver what I wanted while minimizing the risk and making sure I would not hit my head whatsoever.
Right. Your mantra, MoCrazy, adventure, always wanting to be the best, has served you well to get you back to where you are, because it's like you had to relearn everything through this neuroplasticity. It's like you're a new human being. You're Jamie, right? But then the injury, now you have to be a new individual, right?
Yeah, I call myself Jamie 2.0 now. And
I love that.
Jamie 2.0, and I did have to relearn everything. And I was, like mentioned, I was ambitious and competitive and used to pushing my body. But one thing that's important is that while I was doing this, the previous Jamie, so Jamie 1, was a scatterbrain. I never remembered anything. Like I would lose things all the time and I would forget things all the time. And I was not organized at all. I would show up to an international flight like 30 minutes before the plane took off and they'd be calling the last person and I'd walk onto the airplane. Crazy things like that. I was a scatterbrain. And so then after my brain injury, even though this morning I lost my keys, which actually was the first time since my brain injury I've lost my keys, which is a pretty good record.
I think that's a great record. Yes, it is.
But what I was going to say is that I have gotten way more organized. And so I organize and I put on my calendar like pending plans, committed plans. I link everything up and I always show up on time and I'm much more organized, to the fact that like my partner, we live together in our house and he's always like, let me check with Jamie to see if I'm free. Let me check with this. And I even have friends who are like, Jamie, why don't you organize a party? Like I want a party, but like I can't do it. Like you organize it. And so the reason I'm sharing that is because even though being physical was in my innate personality.
Mm-hmm.
These traits that I'm talking about can be learned and can be implemented, and you can build the habits to change your synaptic connections to implement these habits, even if it's not natural for you.
Right. And I think that's the moral of the story, is that Jamie 2.0 is this individual, and you've just had to relearn everything. And for our listeners today, you know, when I was researching, you know, topics to discuss with Jamie, and you know, and you Google and you go to the pictures, to the images, and there's pictures of you doing things that I didn't think would physically, humanly, Jamie, be possible. You're doing all sorts of things, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, oh my goodness, you know. But you had that innate ability. You had that innate ability to do it. Now, you have here rehab at home with Mama Fruit. What does that mean?
Well, so first off, Mama Fruit is my mom.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why she's called Mama Fruit is because when I was about 13, I was in the phase where I called everyone dude. And I'd call her dude. And she didn't like being called dude. And she would tell me.
No, I'm mom. I'm not dude.
Yeah. She'd be like, East Coast, in the East Coast, dudes are big black guys. I'm not big, I'm not a black, I'm not a guy. I'm not a dude.
Right.
Middle of the country, dudes are cowboy dudes.
Right.
People, usually guys, who ride horses. I'm not a guy. I don't ride horses. I'm not a dude. The ones in the West are the ones I'm the most like. Surfer bro dudes. I get it, but I don't surf. I don't live in the West. I'm not a dude. And she was like, you need to come up with another name for me that is respectful and nice. And I was eating an apple, and I go, fine. I'm going to call you Fruit. And then for the next week straight, I called her Fruit every time I talked to her.
Mm-hmm.
And then it evolved a little bit and did become an endearing, lovely name, because her kids were starting to get into young adults that didn't want to call her Mom or Grace, which is her maiden name, her name.
Mm-hmm.
And so she wanted like an endearing term. And then now she's a ski instructor at Park City, and she works, and everyone on her name tag, it actually says Grace Fruit Mauzy. So all the kids call her Fruit. And it's a term of endearment. So that's her story of how she got to be called Mama Fruit.
Mama Fruit. I love that.
Yeah. And a lot of what I did with her, I've mentioned a tiny bit of it, but honestly, I would go to outpatient therapy 3 days a week for 5 hours.
Uh-huh.
And I would say I would go to fruits therapy for 7 days a week for 7 hours. And I would be sound asleep the rest of the time. I would be sleeping.
So you were doing 3 days a week, and then you were doing with your mom 7 days, right? And
yeah.
and
5 days a week at the outpatient therapy, and then with my mom, before and after, we would just work on it.
Right. Right, because your suggestion was to have your mom. We're going to do a second podcast. We're going to have your mom on, and I want to speak to your mom. I want the three of us to be on a podcast. Now, what was she doing with you? You mentioned a couple of things. Get a little bit more specific, because she was able to help you out significantly.
Yeah, because I was going to say, which is something we can do with the podcast, is she started helping me the moment she arrived in Vancouver. And I don't remember those things because obviously I was in a coma, but she was active at that time. And so I'm going to let her tell you about
that's fine.
She did. And then when we left the hospital, those are the things that I can remember. And so I remember for my right side to help with the mobility, I would do things like I would work with a hand strengthener. So I would sit, and I would play with putty sand, and I would pick up coins and put them into a jar. And
fine motor skills. Yeah, fine motor skills you're developing.
My dexterity and my fine motor skills, and tune it all up again. And for a year, she would tape down my strong hand sometimes to use my weak hand. And that started in the hospital. And then she also did things like having me work on writing again, and math again. And she would do other things that helped me emotionally. Like she was in tune to the fact that I had been this amazing high performance individual. And so for me to be very low performance was hard. And so
it's not you at all, Jamie. I can tell you that. And everybody listening and everybody, viewing this, you're just high energy as soon as you get up in the morning, right?
yes. And so for me, like when I'd go hiking with my family, I couldn't keep up. And so instead of me having to say things like, I need a break, that would be really emotionally draining for me because I'd be embarrassed every time I said, I need a break. So instead, they would have me say, look at the view. And this is something she came up with that I think is really valuable. So when we'd go for a hike, I would say, look at the view. And that meant, everyone else knew, that meant Jamie needs a break. But it made me feel so much better to say, look and check out the view instead of, I need a break. And so to find things like when you're recovering, for anyone who's had a brain injury, it's going to change things in your life. And there are going to be deficits that you have to work through and deal with. And one of the big things that emotionally help you throughout that process is to find ways to deal with it that are emotionally sound, like finding that. Can you hear my dog barking?
That's okay. We are real and we are raw. My dog may come in. Jamie, I've had podcasts where the guest had their cat jump up on their lap, where I've had my dog jump up on my lap. It's real and raw. We love it. So it's all good. Don't worry about it. It's all good. So tell me, were you depressed when you realized what was going on? Were you depressed at all? Your life had changed. I mean, you're the best of the best. You're number one in the world. You're on that podium. You're that top three. You had to pivot at some point in time. When were you depressed?
Yeah. So what happened was when I started going back to skiing, I was really excited that I was skiing again. And still at that time, I thought I was going to go back to competing. And I equated a torn ACL with a brain injury. I thought they were about equal. And I was like, well, everyone tears their knees. It'll be fine. And then that winter, I realized I had to relearn everything. I mean, I had already experienced this because I had to relearn how to walk. I had to relearn how to ride a two-wheeler. But with skiing, it really hit home that I had to relearn every trick that I had done previously. And I was taking it slow. Like I said, luckily, I was smart enough to take it slow instead of push beyond my abilities. So I took it really slow, but I began to realize that I would have to relearn everything. And when you learn freestyle, you fall. It's just what happens. And
it's part of the game. It's part of the game, right?
Yeah. And if I fell and hit my head again, they don't know what would have happened, but they think that it would have really bad outcomes, worse than someone without my injury hitting their head.
Right.
And
like
I mentioned before, I had received so much support from my family and my friends. And they would do things like, my friends would send me videos. They'd come visit me in the hospital. Like, everyone was very, very involved. And I didn't feel comfortable putting all their love at risk. And I loved life. And I was like, you know what? I'm young. I have a lot of life ahead of me. I don't want to die because I'm being reckless. And so I made the decision not to go back to competing and skiing that first winter. And when I made that decision, I had a lot of emotional outbursts and I started having triggers and I started going to mental therapy. A nonprofit organization called High Fives that deals with people who've had physical, life-changing events in the outdoors. So they give out grants to what they call their athletes, who are grant recipients. And so I received a grant from them for my mental therapy, which was really helpful because I didn't think I needed to go to therapy. I thought I was lucky I was alive. I was announcing at Dew Tour. I was fine, and I didn't need to go to therapy. And my mom really wanted me to go to therapy. And she's actually a therapist, and she did not want her to be my therapist at all. She had the intelligence to know that would be a bad idea.
It never works out well that way, right, Jamie?
Yeah. Right. So she was talking to High Fives about it. And so then she told me that High Fives signed me up and I had to go or else I would waste their money. So I went a little bit disgruntled and cried the entire first session. And from that moment, I can say that going to therapy positively changed my life. And I would recommend it to anyone because what I learned from having a third party be able to listen to me was tremendous. And besides the struggles of not going back to skiing, it was like competing. It was like that was my whole life. Right. I would train year round. I would travel around to different parts of the world year round for skiing. That was my friends, my goals, my life, my dreams. And so then part of deciding not to go back to it was that I was giving up that portion of my life. And I didn't have any goals. I didn't have any dreams. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And so that was really difficult. So I strongly recommend therapy. If you're in a block, if you feel like life has paralyzed you, therapy can help you regain.
Pulls you out.
Well, I was also going to say, and also I went to Westminster College. I started going back to college a year and a half after my accident. And that was another thing that I think was super helpful because I wanted to go back to college because I wanted someone to judge me and to grade me and to have to perform in a different way and to set goals and accomplish things and not be seen as an invalid, but do things on my own. I actually didn't have any disability help at Westminster. Now, trust me, when finals are coming around, like that first year, it's like I signed up and I was like, this is why I want to go back to college. Then my first finals come around and I'm like, do I really want to get graded? Like, do I really care about it? It was, but yes, that's super helpful to find. And I was 22, so I was around and I had not finished college because I had taken years off for my ski career. So that worked out for me. But even if you're someone else and you can go to a book club or anything you can do that you can set and you can feel connected is really valuable.
Yeah, you know what? You're a high achiever. And I want to go back to school and I want to be graded. It's just like you're on the slopes, right? I want to be graded. What did I get? Did I get a 10.0? You gave me a 9.9. Who are you to give Jamie MoCrazy a 9.9? It's a 10.0, right? So I find that fascinating. And did that help out with your therapy? With your brain also going back to school?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, by going back to school, I could meet other friends and like I mentioned, when I stopped competing, I felt really stuck. Felt really paralyzed in life and just stuck because I didn't know what I wanted to do and I didn't know where I wanted to go. And starting to learn things and being surrounded by different people, I just got a more flow of life beyond competing and skiing. And I realized how I could go back because I got to ski. I learned how to ski again and I would return skiing, how I could go back to skiing and enjoy skiing for fun, not competing. Right. And so that was really, really emotionally helpful. And I was there I actually just graduated in 2019.
Excellent. Congratulations. I love that.
Thank you.
And what did you get your degree in?
Communication.
That's right, because you want to be a speaker, right? You want to get into motivational speaking and health speaking. I love that. What are your goals now? if you were to lay down 3 to 5 goals, what are your goals right now?
Well, my goal, one of the biggest things I'm working on right now is my speaking career and talking more. And the reason why I love talking about my experience goes back to what I said at the very beginning. When Mip told me a year out, when he was an ICU doctor crying, and he said, "Before I saw you, I didn't know it was possible." That made me realize that was the moment I decided that I could have an impact and I could communicate things that people did not think were possible by reading textbooks. And so that's when I wanted to speak. So speaking more and being more known for speaking is definitely one of my goals. And another one of my goals is my little sister is writing a memoir. She actually started it right around my crash and then right after my crash, like a year after, and then needed to take some time to let it settle. And then now she's finishing it. We're working with an editor, and then we're going to contact publishing companies and get it published next spring. Our goal date is April 11th, which is my injury day.
That's the injury day, right?
2021. And it's a memoir, and it tells my accident from her point of view because she was there for all of it. And it gives flashbacks of our childhood and shows support and shows who I am. And so that's a goal. We want to make it a New York Times bestseller. And so that's another one of my goals. And another goal is I was working on a documentary that got on a pause with COVID. And so finishing the documentary, and one of my big dream goals is to have the book that Jeannie wrote turn into a Hollywood movie based on that story. So that's another goal.
So you know what? I have no doubt that you will meet and exceed all of those goals. I mean, to all of our listeners, if you're not inspired by now, and the cliche is, the hairs are sticking up on your arms and on the back of your neck and so forth. And, throughout this entire conversation, I feel that. And if you're not motivated by Jamie MoCrazy, nothing is going to motivate you. When that book is ready to come out, because you're making a positive influence, you're making positive impacts on individuals' lives because of your experience on what happened on April 11th. I want a watermark copy of that book, and we're going to discuss for a third or fourth podcast by then. We're going to discuss that book, and we're going to go chapter by chapter, and we're going to go over some of the important points. So I want that watermark copy of that book. Jamie, I mean, you're just incredible. You've set yourself new goals. You've pivoted. You've changed your, if you will, your mindset. And for what you went through, you've had ups and downs, but you're so positive about life and living life and just going for it. And, I love that about you. That is phenomenal. That is really phenomenal.
Thank you. Well, I do have days when I feel overwhelmed and I just want to cry on the floor like everyone does. But then
Absolutely.
I've realized that once you cry it out, watch a funny show, do a funny dance, do something to get out of that funk. And then it's way better to be happy. It's just way more fun to enjoy what you're doing and have happiness in the situations. And so I feel like instead of being depressed about what happened, it's okay if something is sad to cry about it and shake it off and then go on with life with a smile on your face.
Yeah, you're just rocking. You're just rocking, and we're all coming out of COVID right now, and there's been some, financial tragedies, economies coming back, nothing compared to what you went through. So, for our business owners that are listening to this today, I mean, go back and listen to this podcast again, in your car, to make sure that you're inspired and you're motivated and you're pumped up, right? Throughout the day. Make sure you get Jamie's book when it comes out. Get this book on memoirs, so that you can be positively influenced by this. We're coming up on our hour. I don't want to let you go just yet because I have a million other questions. However, we'll save that. When we're done here, we'll set up that second podcast with Mama Fruit. And I hope it's okay if I call her Mama Fruit.
Oh, she'd love it if you called her Mama Fruit.
All right, I'm going to call her Mama Fruit. So you're studying neuroscience at Harvard. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, so what happened is I've always been fascinated about the brain. And I've been fascinated about the habits that I built with the support of my family and the doctors, starting from the moments when I was in the coma. Till now. And so some of the things that we're going to talk about in the next podcast, like my family put fish oil into my feeding tube with clearance by the medical staff,
right.
Actions like that, and they can be repeated by others for positive results as well. And so learning about how your ions travel and what blocks them and stuff, it's just all been really interesting to me. So I wanted to start learning some neuroscience also, so that what I talk about can be based by fact. So it's my experience and also scientific experience, because I believe in science, that it's a good thing, what's been scientifically proven. And so that's been really helpful. And then when COVID was hitting, I had a lot of mentors and listened to a lot of podcasts. I listened to a lot of podcasts as well. And they kept saying, what can you do to capitalize off of this halt? And so I was in my house. Luckily, my partner, Reggie, he was working as an engineer. He is an engineer. And so he was working remotely, but the whole time. My speaking was stopped. My woodwork was stopped. I actually did not have a job, a way to make financial income. But instead of getting depressed about that, I was like, okay, what can I do to benefit myself? Okay, I can start working on studying neuroscience. So I signed up for their certificate program. And I started studying neuroscience to add to my speaking, add to my life, and because I'm interested in it.
Right. Neuroscience is not something easy to learn, though. But if you're fascinated by it, like you are and I am, it's something very very interesting. So to sum up everything here, you're just an amazing person. That's just number one. I mean, I am in awe of you, and all of our listeners. I mean, they are in definitive awe at this point. World class athlete. World-class person right now, world-class speaker. What do you want to relay to our audience today before we sign off? If there's just something that you really want to hone in on.
So at any stage in your life, anything you're doing, do your own personal best. And that was something that I was raised with, that quote by the Mama Fruit. And I understood pretty quickly how to be the best. And I focused on be the best. And then after my accident, I realized what be your own personal best really meant. It meant that the best you can offer is different every single day. And don't judge what you can offer now on what you could have done in the past or what you should be able to do in the future, but acknowledge what you can do today and do the best, your personal best, every day, and then you'll make steps and go and accomplish what you want to accomplish.
I love that. That is personal best every single day. Don't let the past, hold you back, and keep moving forward, right?
Yeah.
Keep moving forward. Jamie MoCrazy, I want to thank you very much for being on. We have collaborations coming up on multiple different fronts. I've been in contact with some of those individuals, some PhDs and physicians to get the word out on traumatic brain injuries. And you studying neuroscience, they're neuroscientists, and I'm going to bring you into that fold. And I can't wait to meet Mama Fruit.
Yeah.
Okay. I
I'm
can't
very
wait.
excited.
I'm very excited to meet Mama Fruit. How old is Mama Fruit?
She is 61.
She's 61, so I'm about the same age. I don't know what she's going to call me if I call her Mama Fruit, but I
And
want
you
to
know what she's doing?
tell me.
On Monday, she started her PhD.
That's great.
She had kids and she was very happy with having kids, but stopped her education and has always wanted to do it. So she just did it, which I think is a super positive role model to look up to, because there's no age that you can't do things. And
You never stop learning. You never stop growing. You can never stop being who you want to be, right?
exactly.
Jamie MoCrazy, thank you very much for being on the podcast. We'll talk afterwards again, and we'll get some dates set up. I want to thank everybody for listening. Really, from tragedy, trauma to just living an inspired life. It's just so fabulous. Thank you very much for being on. For all of you that are listening, go to YouTube, Suburban Wellness Group, so that you don't miss this podcast at all. Jamie, thank you very much for being on.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. We'll see everybody soon.